Health Supply Chain Procurement Supply Chain Management Project Human Resources for Supply Chain Management webinar. This is the fourth in a series of webinars that we have been hosting. My name's Andrew Brown. I am the Workforce Development Specialist working within this project, and it's my privilege today to be hosting this webinar entitled Best Approaches for Supportive Supervision, Mentoring and Coaching. We have participants from around the world, most continents represented, and you're very welcome. I invite you, if you have not done so already, to type your name, your country, and organisation in the chat so that we can share who's on together. So in this particular webinar, I would like to do the following things together. The object from my perspective is to really help you understand the importance of systems that are required to enable supportive supervision, mentoring, and coaching. There's a lot of discussion about these approaches in the workforce, particularly in our supply chain projects. And we are not all able to understand what's required to make these systems work. So part of my aim today is to help you share that and look at the definitions between the different ones. I'd also like to share with you two case studies, one from Malawi and also one from Zambia from our project, just to share with you a little bit of what we are doing in this project. And as we go along, there'll be a number of opportunities for you to type comments and to type in questions and thoughts. And I'd like to welcome Eliza, who's going to be assisting me with making sure we catch these questions as we move along. This whole session will be recorded and will be added to our YouTube collection of videos on a range of HR topics. And we want to make sure we finish today by ensuring that you have the tools that you need to apply supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching in the environments within which you work. So first of all, what's the difference between supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching? And to invite you just to type a couple of thoughts in the chat. What do you see as the difference between supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching? Sometimes you hear people talk about these terms interchangeably. And on the screen are a couple of pictures from a couple of site visits where we were doing some mentoring with colleagues in both Ghana and in Malawi. So please feel free in the chat just to make any comments you'd like to about the differences. Because in my experience, there are many different definitions people are using, and it would be good to start by being clear on the differences here. So from my perspective, what I'd like to do is to define these three different approaches to human resources performance management with you. I'd like to take the opportunity to think about where these fit in a broader human resources system, because if you just have supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching by themselves, you still will not have a successful human resources system. When I mentioned a couple of case studies, I want to talk to you about the competencies that staff need if they're going to conduct these particular activities well, and finish by talking about key factors for successful systems and share with you a number of resources. So let's go on that journey together. So on the screen, I have for you a definition of supportive supervision, which I'll let you read. But a couple of things that I would like to point out to you. One is that supportive supervision is designed to help staff to improve their performance. Supportive supervision is about optimizing the performance of people in a system. It's about doing so in a respectful and non-authoritarian way. Often as leaders and supervisors, we feel we need to be looking down on people, correcting their behavior, and we feel that we need to be like a policeman or woman as we interact. But true supportive supervision is two-way in its communication. it involves a team approach, and its focus is on facilitating the solving of problems in facilities and looking at how to improve overall performance of individuals as well as performance of facilities. And we use data for decision making. And one of the key points I've highlighted here is it requires regular follow-up. As Anita has noted in the chat, supervision is done over a longer time. And often we see supportive supervision as a point-in-time activity, whereas I would argue that supportive supervision needs to be an ongoing activity. Now, Eliza, can you just, my screen has just played up. Are you seeing the slides appropriately, or is it a bit crooked?
It's actually a bit crooked. It keeps going in and out, Andrew.
Okay, great. Let's just reset that. Okay, I think we're back set. I lost the connection there for some reason.
Perfect. I can see it now.
Great. So when we're looking at supportive supervision, it's helping to make things work rather than checking to see what is wrong. And the key points there are highlighted. And one of the things that I think we underestimate about supportive supervision is about the planning and the time it takes to do this system properly. Let's move on to think about mentoring. Mentoring and coaching are two terms we often use, often associated with supportive supervision. But specifically, mentoring is this relationship between a more experienced or a more knowledgeable person, and they help to guide a less experienced or less knowledgeable person. Usually, it's an older to a younger person, but this is not always the case. It is certainly possible in mentoring to have a situation where a younger person has more knowledge than an older person. But again, mentoring can be multifaceted, which means we can look at it in different ways. It can be a formal program where people apply to be mentors and mentees apply to be mentees. And then there is a system of joining up pairs in order to create relationship. Or it might be informal, where colleagues seek out people in senior positions or seek out people of experience in order to learn from them over a period of time. And we're going to talk about a little bit later the particular elements that are required for successful mentoring and supportive supervision. And the next item I want to talk to you about, so just excuse me for a moment while I just reset this. My technology is playing up, which is unfortunately something that happens. So just give me a moment and I'm just going to reset this screen for us. Just one moment. Whenever we have technology, we always have the possibility of problems. Thank you for your patience just while I reset this. Okay, so Eliza, can you just confirm that that's now working again, please? And again, apologies to the viewers for this particular issue that we're having.
Yes, I can see it now.
And if my screen plays up again, if I could ask you to show the presentation from your side, would that be possible?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So I was summarizing that the difference between mentoring and supportive supervision. And the last item we wanted to talk about was coaching. And this is this form of development in which a person which is a coach, works with an individual to achieve a specific personal or professional goal. We often hear about and talk about coaches in sports, but we can also have coaches as part of in our professional life as well, in order to determine the development of goals, professional goals in individuals. So these are the differences between supportive supervision being this ongoing system, mentoring, a relationship between two people over time, formal or informal, and also the coaching, where it's people coming together for a specific aim in terms of developing a professional outcome. In the chat, I would like to invite you to type in what have been some of your positive and negative experiences about supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching. There is a lot of times people talk about these topics. Eliza, can you just confirm the slides continue to be okay?
No, it's not. I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm trying to get it back up for you.
Okay, let me just try something my end as well. Okay. So, Eliza, I've tried a different approach of logging out and logging in. Can you just confirm that works for you?
Yes, much better, Andrew.
Great. And then I'll get you to mute other people's microphones for me.
Perfect.
So I invite you in the chat to type in the experiences that you've had with regards to supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching, both positive and negative experiences. We've all had them. For me, probably my most favored experience with a mentor is it was an older colleague who I was working with at the hospital, and I noted that the approach that this particular colleague made to engaging with others and to growing professional skills was quite significant and made a real difference in the workplace. So personally, I sought that person out and asked them if over time they would assist me to help in developing my skills as a pharmacist and also as a leader. And that person was very obliging in that relationship. I would like to move on now, and Eliza, I just invite you just to mute others where you can, please, is that mentoring, coaching, supportive supervision by itself will not produce a productive workforce in an organization. And I want to use this particular tool, which is called the People That Deliver Human Resources for Supply Chain Management Theory of Change, just as a way of providing an overview, a systematic overview of how the supportive supervision systems can fit in. Now, a theory of change is a way of describing how a particular system works and the reasons why a system works and the elements that need to be present for a particular system to work well. In the theory of change for human resources in supply chain, we have this long-term outcome, which is that workforce performance is optimized. And this is something that we are all aiming for together. So the question is, what are the components that we need in order to optimize the workforce? And this theory of change gives us this idea. So on the screen, you will see a one-page summary of the theory of change. You can go to the People That Deliver website and get more detailed documentation. But specifically, you will notice what we describe as 4 pathways: staffing, skills, working conditions, and motivation. Staffing, all the critical supply chain positions and or competencies need to be filled. Skills, workers need to be able to apply their skills as appropriate at every level of the supply chain. And working conditions, the working conditions need to support good performance. And motivation, supply chain workers need to be motivated to do their jobs. And all of these four pathways need to be present. Now, supportive supervision sits inside motivation in that good performance is supported, and supportive supervision is one way of helping to support good performance. Mentoring and coaching may also motivate staff to do their job well, but they also fit under the skills pathway because both mentoring and coaching have specific outcomes in order to develop the competency of individuals. But an overall system, if we want to have a work performance that is optimized, all four of these pathways need to be present. And in this webinar, we're not talking about working conditions, we're not talking about staffing numbers and positions, and we're not talking about how to develop competencies specifically, but we have noted that coaching and mentoring probably fits in here, and supportive supervision fits as part of motivation. And I just want the take-home message for you to note is that if you try and do supportive supervision in the absence of a comprehensive human resources approach that involves systems and procedures in all four of these areas, then you will not be able to get optimized work performance. So again, these are the four particular pathways that I was noting for you in order to achieve our long-term outcome. And for those of you who could not read the smaller font, here is the larger font for each of those four pathways and what we are attempting to achieve in order to make that systematic approach happen, which is in the orange. So for more information in regard to those pathways and about the theory of change, I would invite you to go to the People That Deliver website, where you can download some more documentation in more detail. So far what I've done is just introduce this definition around supportive supervision, coaching and mentoring, and then reminded you that these are only a couple of elements that need to fit into a comprehensive approach to workforce systems. I'd now like to highlight a couple of activities from our USAID Global Health Supply Chain Procurement and Supply Management project as a way of seeing how we are attempting to operationalize a couple of these approaches in countries. And then I want to come back to some key elements that need to be in place if we are going to really make sure that supportive supervision, mentoring and coaching work well. For those of you who are not familiar with our project, the Global Health Supply Chain Procurement Supply Management Project is a USAID funded project. We work with country partners and suppliers worldwide, looking at supplying medications through USAID funded programs, but also we have a very strong system strengthening component where for the countries that are highlighted on the screen, we are seeking to work with countries and other partners to strengthen their in-country supply chains. And part of that is the workforce development component, which I'm part of. That's to give you context. The first case study I'd like to draw your attention to is a case study from Malawi, where we looked at reviewing and updating the supportive supervision system. And it's my hope that by sharing the methodology that we used, you will find this a good approach yourselves to consider. So there was a couple of enabling factors before we even started, and the one was that there was this focus from the Ministry of Health since 2013 to look at having this integrated supportive supervision and a peer mentorship program that was combined together. There was technical support from the Ministry of Health, and from their own analysis, they noted that a number of things needed to be improved for supportive supervision to improve. There needed to be better guidelines, there needed to be clear definitions and experience and skills for supervisors. There was a poor articulation of roles and responsibilities and an inappropriate amount of tools and no clear tools and the system was not providing feedback to the individuals that were being supervised. And in some of the documentation, they were noting that instead of being a supportive supervision approach, it was more of a more of a monitoring and evaluation approach. Now, one of the things I want you to watch out for is that if your supportive supervision system involves people going into facilities, ticking boxes against certain criteria, and then that's the end of the visit, then that's a monitoring and evaluation visit. A supportive supervision visit uses data to help correct behaviours to improve an outcome together. And that's something we need to be cautious of. And I hope that through this particular case study, I can show you those differences. Let's move on together. So the key points about why we feel this case study has been successful is one, that the Ministry of Health had a clear idea of what they wanted to achieve. It was not partner-led, it's been government-led. That there were local counterparts within both our project, the Ministry of Health, and another project called ONSI, which is another supply chain project in country, that were engaged through the whole process. So there was what we describe as engagement and co-creation of this activity. There was a clear vision. There was adequate amounts of funding to see this whole procedure through. And we noted that we need to engage both the workforce development and the human resources teams of the ministry, as well as the monitoring and evaluation teams. Because as you will see in this case study, we wanted to separate the monitoring and evaluation component from the supportive supervision component. So this overall process had two phases. The first phase was to critically review the current situation and suggest and validate a new approach. And the second phase was to equip district supply chain supervisors with the competencies required and then assist them in rolling this out. And then the third phase was to follow up those district supply chain supervisors in their work environments to see that they were able to transition their skills to the workplace and through monitoring evaluation show improvements in the facilities in those districts. So it was a comprehensive approach, not simply updating the tools and the policies. So the overall supportive supervision framework that we've implemented has four components. So the first component is we use what they describe as a health facility performance monitoring tool, which is basically a checklist tool that looks at a basket of medicines, their availability, where the stock forms have been filled in, looks at expiry dates, looks at handling, looks at ordering procedures. And this is the monitoring aspect. So step one is actually conducted by the monitoring and evaluation team, where they do the data collection against this tool to look at strengths and weaknesses of aspects of the supply chain, both end stock availability and process indicators on how the systems are working. The second tool the M&E team uses is a competency self-assessment tool, which allows the person in charge of medicines at the facility to offer their feedback on where they are feeling strong and where they need improvement. So step one involves collating the data about performance. Step two, that data is looked at by district supervisors in conjunction with regional supervisors to then determine which are the weaker facilities and which are the stronger facilities. The weaker facilities are then prioritised with a limited supportive supervision budget in order to go and visit and to update their skills in the areas identified that are weak. To assist the district supervisors, there's a reporting template. There's a supervisor's toolkit, which has a number of visual aids, work aids, and approaches to teach and to help mentor staff in different supply chain competencies. And there is also a series of short pieces of knowledge that are easy to accessible form that these supervisors can take. So they prepare for the visit by doing two things. One, looking at the data to look at which areas are weak and which are stronger in order to commend the facility for what they're doing well, but then to take the time of the visit, usually 2 hours, to help improve the competency of the individuals identified by their weakness. Then the site visit is conducted. The record of the visit is acknowledged in the supervisory logbook. And then there is post-visit reporting and follow-up across the district and up to the regional level. Then to close the loop, in the next quarter, there's another M&E visit in order to look at the monitoring evaluation and compare the data. Now, it's at this stage that some people have suggested that, well, Andrew, that's a lot of time. There's a fair bit of resource involved here, and is it all worth it? Well, we need to keep in mind at the end of the day a couple of things. One is that medicine's availability at the facility level is what we're all aiming to improve for critical medicines availability for our patients. Number two, all of the research around human resources clearly shows that supportive supervision and follow-up is vital if systems and procedures for supply chain are going to be followed. And as noted in the People That Deliver theory of change, it's a critical pathway, but not the only pathway to improve performance. Now, in our Malawi case study, we've been able to demonstrate improved stock availability and improved following of processes in the facilities where these supportive supervision activities have been undertaken. We have not taken the step at this stage to look at the cost impact of those changes, but that is something that we are considering. What you see on the screen is a particular activity that we did, I wanted to point out, that we think was particularly important. And we had a 4-day interactive workshop where we taught soft skills or the competencies required to do supportive supervision. I'm going to list those shortly. But one of the things that a number of you may have heard me say already is that a technical expert of any description, particularly we're talking about supply chain technical experts in this case, do not automatically have the soft skills or the competencies to conduct supportive supervision well. These need to be trained into people, and people need to have the opportunity to practice and use these skills in a safe environment and also at facilities that they serve. So the particular workshop that we put together was very interactive. It looked at developing those competencies, and then we went in small teams on site visits where the teams got to practice those competencies in a controlled environment. And then our regional supervisors in the project followed up the district supply chain supervisors in order to help them and to observe them putting into practice these skills. So I just want to emphasize this point. A number of you have heard me say this before, but the soft skills of leadership, and in this situation, skills around communication, feedback, follow-up, and education are not skills that people have automatically, and these need to be trained. And not only that, but we need to ensure that individuals who we've trained are able to have these skills translated into their work environment. I'm going to just give you a couple more slides to finish this case study and invite you for a couple of questions. And Eliza, I'm going to get you to note the questions that come through in the chat and then give me the top questions that I should respond to shortly. So if you're getting questions that are coming to mind about this case study, please type them in the chat now and we'll have a question time shortly. So in terms of the steps in the final phase was where we rolled this out in the range of districts across Malawi. And then one of the key activities that we're looking to do next is that we recognize that within a district, the true power lies usually with the district medical officer and the district health office, the DMO and the DHO in this situation. And as a closing the loop activity, we're looking to have a couple of regional 1 or 2 day workshops where we bring the district medical officer together and we bring the supply chain in charge from the district together, and we talk through the responsibilities and advocate for the district medical officer to really understand the supply chain and to also give him or her skills to be able to understand when the supply chain is going wrong, so some data analysis skills, and also to make sure they can understand the supportive supervision program and be able to ask for correct reports and feedback in order to ensure that the supply chain, which is so vital for the effectiveness of health programs, but so often forgotten about by district medical officers, becomes a bit more of a priority. And we're looking to roll out this activity over the next couple of months, and we're hoping to be able to report on the ongoing data about facility improvement. As a side note, the particular other activity that's going on, but not highlighted actually in this case study today, was that the high-performing facilities have been singled out to be acknowledged for their performance. And we're currently exploring if there is a way that people who are in charge of medicines in high-performing facilities can act as mentors to facilities that have not performed so well. So this is another aspect where it brings in the mentoring aspect between facilities and between individuals, and that's something that we're looking to explore. Eliza, at this point, I'd like to come back to you and to see if you can just highlight for me a couple of questions that are appearing in the chat.
Sure. We have one from Lillian. Are the self-assessment tools and the supervisory toolkit available? What was the content of the supervisor's training?
Fantastic. So I would be happy to provide the overview of that material. So it was a 4-day, so first of all, we created with the supervisors a list of competencies that we felt the supervisors should have, and we listed all those down. And we agreed with those together between the Ministry of Health. We had some key representatives of the district supervisors and from our project, and we agreed on the set of competencies that someone who is going to be a supervisor of facilities should have, and we've got a list of those, and I'll share that in the information packet for this particular webinar. The next thing we did was in the workshop, we had a series of, first of all, interactive sessions around communication, around feedback, giving and receiving feedback, about different types of leadership styles, different types of learning and teaching styles, and different ways to teach people basic competencies. Not only did we do the theory about that, but we did a lot of practice. So not only small group work, but role play work, and people got to give and receive feedback and to also constructively criticize feedback. Then in teams, we went to different facilities in teams of about 5 in order to conduct a supervisory visit based on some data we had on that facility. And each individual who went on that team had the opportunity to try out some of their skills with those facilities, and then we came back for a debrief together. So that sort of gives you a bit of a flavour, and I'll be happy to provide some more of those materials. Back to you, Eliza, for other questions.
All right. Question from Richard. What are the reasons cited in country for the lack of supportive supervision practices, even if not formalized? Given M&E results, which seem commonplace, one would surely question how to improve results.
Sure, and I'd actually invite everyone on the call, if you've got an answer to this, to put it in. But in my experience, one of the main reasons that supportive supervision activities do not occur is that they're not budgeted for. For supportive supervision to take place, there needs to be not only a budget, but actually money made available in the budget for the travel allowances. That's the main reason I've come across. So I invite others to type in the chat their main reason. The second reason is that there is an insufficient amount of skilled people to conduct these visits regularly. So that, in other words, in the supply chain system, there are just enough people to get the work done, and even then it can be really busy. And because of that, supportive supervision activities fade away as the pressures of day-to-day stock ordering and stock control take over. The third is that a number of places just don't have the policies and systems and procedures for something like this and don't see its importance. Back to you, Eliza, for one more question.
What measures were put in place to ensure the sustainability of this Malawi supportive supervision, especially with staff turnover that sometimes can disrupt the process?
Sure. That's a great question, and staff turnover is one of those items that becomes more addressed if you take that systematic approach to human resources development as outlined in the People That Deliver a Theory of Change. So I have that as an overall statement. In our Malawi activity, we've involved the different levels of government in each stage and approach. And we have also ensured that the Human Resources Department's been involved in order to embed the policies and the tools. Now, the real trick for sustainability is, if our project left, would this activity continue to go on? And at the moment, the question mark is, we are not 100% sure that the budgeting side of it has been completely taken up. In other words, the bit that we still need to work on is the advocacy for the funding, ongoing funding by the government. So what we are hoping is that through the data analysis that we've done, that we can show improvement and stock availability, and that will be sufficient in order to show the need for the government to invest. But that's an assumption on our part. One of the ideals for me would be if we could also show, by doing something like this and the improved productivity, how that improved, what the cost benefit of that was. Yeah, some great questions there. And Eliza, keep note, because if we've got some time, we will come back to some of those other questions that might still be there. I want to quickly talk about another case study. This is a smaller pilot case study in Zambia about mentoring. Again, Zambia is a very large country by its land mass, and it's quite a large distance between facilities. And one of the things that they wanted to do is, as a activity, I've used the word motivation here, this is the motivation for doing this activity. Both the Ministry of Health with our project there wanted to introduce a mentorship program because they've noticed that from a lot of different capacity building investments of in-service and pre-service sort of training, that they are very expensive, and wanted to see if they could build an approach for mentoring within the system that involved the exchange and transfer of best practices between facilities at the same level. And so this was the background. Is there another way of building competence or capacity between facilities apart from just training? And so the concept was to try and see if a mentoring approach would be helpful. So teams from both the Ministry of Health and the project got together in order to prepare a tool. And that tool, again, was a monitoring and evaluation tool in order to assess and grade facilities on their performance against a series of medicines availability, some endpoint indicators about stock availability, expiries, etc., but also some process indicators about how well stock cards were filled in, order forms completed, etc. So that's a similarity between this Zambia case study and the Malawi case study. So armed with that, they did, this is a trial, was just to start, in 9 facilities. They actually, in this situation, they got people from the facilities to be part of the teams to visit other facilities. So in other words, instead of being an external group of senior supervisors coming to a facility, it was a peer-to-peer activity where, so we have 9 facilities, 9 people, 1 from each of the facilities or 2 people for each of the facilities came together. In Zambia, we focus on pharmaceuticals as well as lab personnel, so 2 different supply chains. No team member visited their own facility, but in teams of 4, they went to visit other facilities. So you can see that it was a peer review type process. And that's under sort of a broader definition of mentoring, but a peer review process. And the team had to agree on the scores that they gave the particular facilities using the tool. And at the outset, they decided if the facility scored over 80%, then they'd be considered as mentors and for best practice. And if they scored under 80%, then they need to be mentees and perhaps needed some further development. So they had very high standards at the outset. What was interesting is when they prepared their tool and they did the visits, they saw this. Now what you can see is in yellow, that's when the 80% was passed. So from those 9 facilities, there was a pharmacy score, a lab score, and an average score. And there was a general feeling that they were doing supply chain well. But don't forget, how was this assessment tool prepared? Well, it was prepared by leaders from those facilities to then go and assess facilities. And what they realized is that by using data to do a stronger assessment of their facilities, that they were falling short of the standard that they were trying to hold to. So using this particular approach, Liza, I'll see if you can mute those other microphones for me, please. They only had 1 facility that came up overall that could be a mentor, and then Hospital E came up that its pharmacy area could be used to mentor. So this was quite a significant result because they were expecting much higher scores. So what they realized is that they needed to do some internal activities first. Now, there was 90% of the facilities were doing very well with their stock cards. A number of the facilities had good LMIS systems, but where a lot of them lost their marks was in bad storage practices and the fridge monitoring and lack of functioning air conditioners. And so their facilities were strong on the ELMIS systems, but weak in terms of storage, and that's where those marks came undone. So what they then looked at doing was taking actions, looking at, obviously when they visit facilities, they looked at the purpose, the transparency and accountability, and there was lots of openness into this facility, particularly because it was peer-to-peer. But what was interesting is they not only used the opportunity when they visited a facility to score the facility against the assessment tool, but they also, in a peer-to-peer way, used the opportunity to update stock cards, look at stock control arrangements, and separate expired stock. Just one moment, let me see what we can do. Microphone. Sorry, I just have to find that microphone. Eliza, can you find that microphone for me to mute?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Thank you. I'll get you to do that for me. So this is an example of a case study where the local team learned a lot of things. They came at the case study with an initial ambitious approach to introduce a complete mentoring package where they felt they would find strong facilities and pair them up with other facilities to improve. By applying an assessment tool that they built together, they were able to assess their facilities and find out the shortcomings and realize that they had a lot of work to do before they could actually move towards a mentoring program. But of particular interest was the approach they took was not to use a monitoring and evaluation approach for simply the purposes of collecting data, but also while they were at the facility to use their time in order to improve how that facility was operating. And so we present that to you as a trial that our team conducted. They concluded that the tool they used was very user-friendly. It did identify gaps, that the staff were very keen on the overall approach and wanted to improve, and this gave them an opportunity to improve and showed them where their particular activities needed development, and that they realized that by working together that they were developing professional community, and this was something that they really wanted to continue with, and that is the networking between facilities, sharing, helping and improving each other's approach. So this particular case study we share with you as an activity in progress. This was an initial trial. We share with you not as a polished approach that you can immediately take and put into practice, but there was a lot of learning about working with each other and looking to help improve quality of supply chain service delivery by working together, and particularly by applying data together. And again, I'd invite you to type in the chat any questions. And Eliza, I'll just take one or two questions quickly if they're there before I move on to the last part of the webinar today.
Sure, we have one here. Did integrated supportive supervision effective meet the level of competency needed?
So I think what you're asking is whether the supervisors had the competency needed to conduct the supervision correctly. That's how I'm going to interpret the question. If it's different, then please retype the question. But one of the key things that we had the regional supervisors in Malawi follow up was to follow up whether there was actually change in facilities and also the experience of facilities when the supervisor came. So we took the effort to see whether the supervisors that were trained could do their job well. And of approximately 30 district supervisors that were trained, there was probably 1, 2 or 3 where they felt they didn't meet the overall standard required to be an effective supervisor. But the feedback was overwhelmingly that they were able to show the skills necessary to make sure the system work. Back to you, Eliza, for the next question.
Sure. What would be the solution to recurrent problem, the reports and feedback given by supervision in the logbook when assessed on a current supervision is usually low in terms of following up?
Sure, and this person's question has taken away one of my final slides, which means supportive supervision approaches only work if you follow up and follow through. And this is a particular action that one of my mentors in business taught me. With anything to do with people, if you do not follow up and follow through, then you have lost the impact. In the same way as if you do a data assessment with an M&E tool and you don't provide feedback to the facility. If you do a supportive supervision, you give actions to take, but you don't take the opportunity to follow up, then that's a problem, because you've wasted the opportunity. So this is one of the critical weaknesses of supportive supervision systems, and something that needs to be addressed by looking at the funding, but also looking at creative ways of following up. You don't have to perhaps follow up in person. You can make a phone call. You could send an email. You can do a WhatsApp. there are other ways to follow up rather than thinking that you need to have the funding to go and do another visit, although that's very helpful. One more question.
How long should supportive supervision be conducted before you assess impact?
The impact is always an interesting one. Most people would say with a system like this, it would be a couple of years or 12 months, sorry, minimum of 12 months to a bit longer. We're just in the process in Malawi, for example, of collecting the 12-month data. So after we've analysed that data, we'll be able to see whether we have been able to show some improvements in the particular indicators that we were looking at those facilities. I would usually say a minimum of 12 months, although that's if you're looking at systematic impact, although you can also get impact measurements pretty quickly. So for example, activities that I was doing in Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, when we followed up in facilities some 6 months later, we sent supervisors to go and check on facilities and also to provide some photographic evidence of what was happening in the facilities. And we could document at that early stage, 6 months after, that there was significant improvements to what had been shown from the monitoring evaluation visit 6 months previous. So if you get keen individuals who really are knowledge sponges and look to apply their information quickly, you can get immediate change. For overall systems improvement that you can measure with statistics, I'd say approximately 12 months or so. Thank you for your questions. We need to, in the interest of time, move on to the last part of the webinar. So I'm listing here, the next 3 slides, 9 key competencies that I think supportive supervision, mentoring, and coaching leads or supervisors require. I'm not going to read through the meaning of all these, but they need to be able to interpret data. We noted that with data, you can see where the strengths and weaknesses are and whether people are improving or not. You need to be able to identify what the issues are. There's no point just looking at data and realizing there's a problem unless you can understand the problem and take action. A supervisor involved in any of these 3 activities needs to be able to communicate effectively, which involves rapport, proper communication. It involves confidence and empathy, being able to understand what the other person is experiencing. Needs to be able to promote participation, not act as a policeman, but really discuss, listen, encourage, and get others engaged, because we all need to be part of fixing the supply chain together. It's not one person's role. They need to be able to solve problems. They need to be able to set targets on showing incremental or step-by-step improvements. They need to be able to educate. They need to be able to instruct others on how to do things better. They need to be able to give reasons. They need to be able to demonstrate. They need to be able to be patient and clear in that education role. They need to be able to provide constructive feedback, being able to identify both good things to praise people on, but not be scared of identifying things that need improvement, but using professional and appropriate language that helps people understand the issues they need to address and encourage them to do so. And the big one here is this continuity, which I noted earlier. Follow up and follow through in order to ensure that those improvements are taking place, or if they're not, that further correction of behaviour is being encouraged for the ultimate goal of improving performance in a facility. So these are 9 key competency areas that we need to be training our supervisors in if they're going to be effective in supportive supervision. But also, if you have a leadership role in mentoring and or coaching professionally, then you need to also be developing these competencies. So key factors for successful programs is that from a mentor's perspective, we encourage mentors because it renews their enthusiasm for work, enhances coaching and counselling and modelling skills, refines leadership, and cultivates the next generation of supply chain professionals. For mentees, we're looking at advances professional development, develops new and different perspectives and builds professional relationships, and also provides that sort of safe environment. So where I've got mentor or mentee, you could have swapped it out for coach or someone who's being coached or supervisor or who's being supervised. They're the benefits for each group of people in those three situations. But overall, for successful programs in supportive supervision and mentoring specifically, there need to be formal systems that are well thought through with supporting SOPs and templates. Activities need to be budgeted for. Appropriate time needs to be given for these activities. But most importantly, supervisors need to be trained in the necessary soft skills. Again, technical people do not automatically become good supervisors. And crucially, we need to be following up and following through on what we discover if we want change to happen. We've come to the end. I just wanted to point out that there are a couple of pages of linked resources about supervision, how to conduct supervision, and supportive videos that will be available on the links from this webinar. And also, we'll be providing a couple of other resources in a Dropbox for you to access. And I'm going to stick around for a few minutes. Eliza, can I check that you have a couple of minutes?
I sure do.
And I'd invite people who are happy to remain on the call for a little while, if you would like to type in your questions. I'm going to stick around for about 15 minutes so that if you've got particular questions you'd like answered, we would be able to answer those for you. So please type away, and Eliza, if you don't mind, I'll let you to prioritize different questions you've seen.
Sure. Actually, here's one from Andrew. Do you have suggestions on materials for training supervisors to reach the 9 competencies?
Mr. Andrew Inglis, I do have, and I will be happy to provide a link to all the materials I've developed so that you can use them. Certainly.
There's one for the Zambia case study. The assessment was conducted using a standardized tool. What was the assessment about? Was it more technical or more soft skills?
Yeah. So in the Zambia case study, the testing at the facility level, that tool that together as a team they developed, was looking at the technical competencies of running the supply chain at that level. So it was about stock availability, it was about following the processes, it was about out of dates and expiries, etc. Now, in the activity we did in Malawi, we developed a list of competencies, the soft skills required for supportive supervision, and we used that tool to assess the supervisors before the training, after the training, and then when they went back to their districts to see that they had confidently developed the skills, and we watched them in their workplace. So that was where the soft skills bit came in. For the Zambia case study, I noted the focus was on the assessments at the technical level. In the Malawi case study, we looked at the supportive supervision competencies and how to develop those in the supervisors as well. Back to you.
The peer-to-peer approach was a good approach. I would like to know if this approach provides the technical information to the people being mentored.
So one of the things this person, I think, is highlighting is that are you sure that if you're using a peer-to-peer approach that you have all the expertise you need to do a good job? Because perhaps all of the experience is not present. What was interesting in this example is that the tool that was developed was of a high standard, was reviewed by senior people and found to be of good quality. And it was interesting that they were holding up themselves collectively to a higher level of performance than they realized they were able to achieve in their own facility. In other words, they developed a checking tool together that most of them failed their 80% benchmark. So they were clear on what was required in order to have good performance in their facilities. they marked themselves competently, and then they knew what to do in order to move forward. My observation here is the fact that they put data to the situation helped them to realize their shortcomings when in fact they hadn't realized that before, even though they were working in those facilities. Back to you, Eliza.
HRH 2030 conducted a landscape analysis to try and understand what specific inputs and processes make supportive supervision successful. One key enhancement was to invest in the supervisor to supervise and mentor them to be more supportive and facilitative, improve their access to the data as well as their behaviors to go beyond M&E. The challenge for supervising frontline health workers and probably supply chain workers is how dispersed they are the area across a district. How did your team address this in Malawi or in other contexts?
Great, excellent question, and thank you for that. And I would be pleased if that particular documentation is now published, if you could send the link to me on that, that publication, would be very helpful. So the remote nature of things is a difficult one. Oh, it's still coming. Thanks, Rachel. Looking forward to that and adding that to my resources to share. So it was interesting that in both Malawi and in Zambia, they were concentrating on a physical presence approach. So there is that sort of resource intense approach in some ways. So in those two examples, they were not using a remote approach. In Nepal, there was a district supervisor group that was using WhatsApp as a way more for helping to encourage improved performance and sharing difficulties rather than supportive supervision. With my work in the Federated States of Micronesia some time ago, they used radio contact in order to encourage. One of the shortcomings of non-visual ways of providing supportive supervision, and of course with technology we could probably use video and so on, but non-visual ways is you're always relying on the truthfulness of the person at the other end to tell you what's going on and data and are things improving, etc. So I agree with you that we need to be exploring different ways of doing this, and at this point in our project we have not. And I'd be very interested, Rachel, if your particular project comes up with some ideas, that'd be great. Back to you, Eliza.
Can you share more on the follow-up after the supportive supervision?
Sure. So what's happened, so just to be clear again, this is in the Malawi context. If you can imagine that we have the district supply chain in charges. For this particular activity, I was the lead facilitator, if you like, and then we had 5 co-facilitators. I didn't mention this before. The 5 co-facilitators were people who had responsibilities as regional supervisors of the districts. So my role was to work with them in the development of the approaches and materials, as well as to train them in their role of supportive supervision. And together we came up with the approach that these regional supervisors would go out to the districts and follow up each, so this is 30 divided by 5, so each person, regional supervisor, would follow up 6 district supply chain supervisors in order to see if they were able to use these competencies in the workplace. So that involved going to site visits where these particular district supervisors had been and inquiring of the staff there about how well the supervisory visit went, looking for documentation and things that happened. So it was relatively resource intense, but the purpose of the follow-up was then to determine that actually what was taught happened in the workplace. And a key component there was involving the regional supervisors as part of the project from the beginning. Thanks, Eliza. Back to you.
Was the supervisor always supervising the same staff in Malawi from one supervisor to the next?
Sure. So the way it works is that the district supervisor of the pharmaceutical supply chain is consistently responsible for all of their facilities. The model where people move between different facilities was the Zambia example. So in Malawi, the same supervisor regularly conducted the visits in their district of their approximately 50 facilities. So they usually only got to each place once every year or once every 2 years to be sure. And that's why using the monitoring and evaluation material, we wanted to give them the data to focus on the more needy facilities in priority. So prioritizing those compared to other facilities. I hope that answers that question.
Next
Back
question.
to you, Eliza, for the next question.
McDeloitte would like to ask if you could share some of the indicators you use to measure outcomes, as well as the data collection and analysis tools.
Sure. I'll have a more detailed side discussion on that, McDeloitte, with you, because the data collection tools are very clear what the indicators and so on are, and we're using those to measure impact. So yes, please send me a side email to make sure I don't forget. Back to you, Eliza.
Perfect. For the Malawi concept, was SS provided to all the MOH facilities, or prioritization was considered? If they were prioritized, what measures were employed?
Sure. So thank you very much, Luxon. The key aspect here I noted, but quickly, and that is step one of the new process was to conduct a monitoring and evaluation visit where there is a series of indicators to be measured. So these were with a handful of basket of medicines approach, looking at stock availability, looking at stock cards, looking at expired stock, so there's fridge recording, etc. So endpoint indicators of stock availability and process indicators around an agreed monitoring tool that provided the data. When that data came back to the regional level and to the headquarters level, that was looked at, and facilities were then rated according to their performance from that tool, and lower performing facilities were prioritized for the supervisory visits. And again, I can share those tools and approach with you if that was would be helpful to you. Just send me an email and I'm happy to do that. Back to you, Lada.
Perfect. Here's the last question. I would like to know if health facilities have QI teams and what their roles are to sustain some of the TA received through supervision.
Sure. So by QI, I'm assuming you mean quality improvement teams. What's interesting, if a number of you are on IAPHL, you will notice from time to time different projects talk about sort of quality improvement cycles. One of the activities, and what I like about this question is it's really inferring that we all should be involved in quality improvement. And I didn't use those words throughout this whole presentation. But of course, as you consider what we've done, we've taken data, we've identified an issue, we've suggested an intervention in order to improve the process, and then we're remeasuring data to see if we're successful. Guess what? We've just done a quality improvement cycle, but we didn't call it that. So in terms of saying these QI teams, I'm then going to say, let's take a broad approach and ask ourselves, are there teams in countries that help to improve the systems using a data-directed approach, or data, depending on which continent you're in? And I would argue that everyone who works in an organization with the health supply chain understands that supportive supervision on the basis of data is something that we want to do, but not everyone is doing it. Those that have been given resource support to make that happen have definitely shown improvements because of that investment. And I would say the desire is there in many places. People who've done any education around supply chain will know that ongoing quality improvement of supply chain systems is critical, and it never stops, and it should never stop. Supportive supervision is one approach, but there are other different approaches, whether you call it a formal quality improvement approach, etc. So not everywhere people think they should, but resource, time, and really standard operating procedures and skills of people to make it happen. Thanks for your question. So as we conclude, I want to thank everyone for their involvement with us. I've taken you on a journey where I've initially tried to lay out some clear definitions for supportive supervision, mentoring, and coaching. I've then taken a step back and reintroduced the concept of the people that deliver theory of change for human resources for supply chain management, pointing out that if we want great performance from our staff, we need to have a range of systems in place, and these were represented by the 4 pathways in that particular model. And then I went on to just give a couple of case studies about how in our project we have looked at supportive supervision and mentoring, and then particularly finished by emphasizing that there is a range of competencies that are required if we're going to do any of these activities of supportive supervision, mentoring, and coaching effectively. Because just because someone's a technical professional doesn't mean they have the soft skills to do this properly. And then I concluded by pointing out the key factors for success, which included people appropriately trained to do this work, standard operating procedures and tools, and the right amount of resources and time given for these actions to take place, with the big take-home message being follow up and follow through in these systems is ultimately important for the most effective performance improvement. And then I've left you with a few tools and resources. From this point, I'm going to be publishing the recording of this on the YouTube channel that we've started, and so you can have access to that. And I will be sending out an email that will have a link to a Dropbox that will have a range of resources that we've discussed on this today. I'd like to personally take the opportunity to thank Eliza for your assistance in managing the questions and the people. And most of all, participants from around the world to engage in this discussion with us. Thank you for your time. And as always, if you feel that this has been interesting and you have further questions, the email to contact me is on the last slide of the presentation. And you would be welcome to follow me up. Eliza, is there anything that I may have forgotten as we close today?
I think that's it. Well, somebody just put in a last question if you would like it.
Okay, let's go for the last question.
All right, last one.
Everyone's satisfied.
Every implementation tools are in Dropbox that you shared?
Yes. Oh, no, that particular one I just shared was just some tools. But I will have a link. So what will happen is I'll resend out an email to everyone who got an invitation to this webinar, and there'll be a new link in there to have selected tools in. But that's a start. The one you saw was a start.
That's it.
Great. Okay, thank you, everyone. I wish you a lovely rest of your day. And thank you very much for listening. And we will let you know in 2 months' time when our next webinar is. Thank you, and bye for now.